Picture this. It is the winter of 1934. A tuberculosis ward in a missionary hospital somewhere in the hills of northern India. The air smells of carbolic soap and burning coal. Outside, a snowstorm is grinding the mountain paths to silence. Inside, a man lies on a narrow cot with barely enough blanket to cover his shoulders. A Canadian man. A man who had given up a thriving medical practice in Toronto, a house on Bloor Street, a future that anyone would have envied. To come here, to this, to a room where the ceiling leaks and the patients outnumber the beds 3-1. His name is Dr. Frederick Blythe Norwood. He is 51 years old. One of the nurses leans over him. She asks if he wants her to send for the chaplain. Frederick opens his eyes, those quiet, steady eyes that 100 patients had trusted with their lives, and he shakes his head. Not because he doesn't want prayer, but because he has never stopped praying since the morning in 1909 when a boy named Arun died in his arms, and Frederick finally understood what his life was supposed to cost him. This is that story. But here is what nobody tells you about Frederick Norwood, the version of this man that history almost entirely forgot. What you are about to hear is not the story of a famous missionary doctor. Frederick never sought fame. He refused speaking tours. He returned form letters from mission societies who wanted to publish his reports. What you are about to hear is the story of what happened in the hidden places, in the years before anyone was watching, in the decisions no one ever saw him make. A price paid in secret that produced power nobody could fully explain. Comment below. I choose the hidden life if you are ready to hear what it truly costs to be used by God. Frederick Blythe Norwood was born on the 14th of March, 1883, in a red brick house on King Street in Hamilton, Ontario. His father was a Methodist minister of the old school, stern in the pulpit and generous at the table, the kind of man who kept a pot of stew permanently on the stove because there was always someone who needed feeding. His mother was the daughter of a Scottish schoolteacher, sharp-minded and soft-spoken, who read aloud to Frederick every evening from the time he was 4 until the time he was old enough to read back to her. Hamilton in those years was a city building itself upward. Steel mills, textile factories, railway yards expanding every season. The streets smelled of coal smoke and river mud. Frederick grew up watching men come back from the mills with burnt hands and coughing lungs, and watching his father pray over them in their kitchen chairs while his mother heated water on the stove. He understood early, even before he had language for it, that the world was divided into people who suffered and people who had the ability to help. He knew which side he wanted to stand on. He was not a prodigy. He was not the kind of boy teachers wrote letters about. He was quiet, methodical, the sort of student who stayed behind after lessons to ask the question he had been too careful to ask in front of the others. He had one gift that his teachers consistently noted: the ability to sit with something difficult without flinching from it. He did not look away from hard things. He had a particular steadiness in the face of distress that some people are born with, and most people spend their whole lives trying to acquire. When Frederick was 13, his younger sister Constance contracted scarlet fever. For 11 days, the family moved around that house in near silence. His father prayed in the study with the door closed. His mother slept in the chair outside Constance's room. And Frederick, who was not supposed to be awake, sat at the top of the stairs night after night, listening to his sister's labored breathing through the wall and asking God, with the blunt sincerity of a 13-year-old, to please not take her. Constance survived. Frederick never forgot what he felt when the doctor came down the stairs on the 12th morning and told his mother that the fever had broken. He felt something he later described in his private journal as a debt. Not a debt of guilt, but a debt of gratitude so large he did not know how he would spend it. He began to understand, in that vague and unformed way that understanding first comes to us in childhood, that the rest of his life was supposed to be the repayment. He enrolled in medicine at the University of Toronto in the autumn of 1901. He was a solid student, not brilliant, not celebrated, but thorough. He had patience for the parts of medical training that broke other students. The long dissections, the clinical rounds in the charity wards, the exposure to suffering, that was simply part of the curriculum. While other students grew calluses around their compassion out of necessity, Frederick seemed to remain genuinely present with each patient. His instructors remarked on it. One of them wrote in a letter of recommendation that Frederick Norwood possessed a quality of attention that is rarer in a physician than technical skill. He graduated in 1906. He returned to Hamilton and joined a small general practice on James Street North. He was 23 years old. Within 2 years, the practice had grown. He was well regarded. People asked for him by name. He began courting a woman named Margaret Allister, the daughter of a local solicitor, who had gray eyes and a careful laugh, and who understood without being told that Frederick would always put the patient before the dinner reservation. He should have been happy. By every reasonable measure, he was. But something was wrong and he could not name it. Not wrong in the way that pain is wrong. More like the feeling of having read only the first chapter of a book you know has something urgent in it. He attended church. He prayed regularly. He gave a portion of his earnings to the mission fund. He did everything a conscientious Christian man of his era and social position was expected to do. And yet, he began reading mission reports in the evenings, not because he planned to go anywhere, just to read. Reports from India, from West Africa, from the interior of China, places where a doctor was not one of many but was the only trained medical person within 100 miles. He read descriptions of patients who walked 3 days to see a physician who was not there. He read field letters written by exhausted mission workers describing the same scene over and over. The persons they could not help because they did not have the training and the death that followed. He put the reports away. He picked them up again. He prayed about it, vaguely, the way a person prays about something they are not quite ready to hear the answer to. Then, in February 1909, a letter arrived from a mission society in London with a description of a hospital in the hills of the Kangra Valley in Punjab, northern India. The hospital had been built 3 years earlier. The doctor who ran it had died of typhoid in November 1908. The hospital was currently being operated by 2 nurses and a lay worker. The mission society was requesting anyone with medical training who felt called to serve. Frederick read the letter twice. He set it on his desk. He went out to make his evening rounds. He came back at 11 o'clock at night and read it a 3rd time. He slept badly. In the morning he read it again. He spent 6 weeks praying about it, not 5 minutes of morning devotional prayer. He means the real thing. Hours in the evenings after Margaret had gone home. Saturdays at the church when the building was empty. He was not dramatic about it. He told no one what he was considering. He simply put himself in front of God and waited, the way you wait for something that is taking longer than you hoped, but that you have not given up expecting. And then, on a Tuesday morning in late March 1909, during rounds at the Hamilton General, a 7-year-old boy named Arun Sharma, the son of an Indian merchant who had come to Hamilton for business and whose child had fallen ill with pneumonia, died in Frederick's arms before anything more could be done. Frederick held that child for a long time after. He did not put him down right away the way protocol suggested. He sat in the chair beside the bed with this small body, and he looked at the window and he thought, somewhere right now there is a hospital with no doctor and children exactly like this one who are dying because no one comes. He walked to his office. He wrote a letter to the Mission Society in London that afternoon. He wrote a letter to Margaret that evening. He sat in his kitchen until 2 in the morning. When he went to bed, he was not the same person who had woken up that morning. Margaret Allister did not ask him not to go. She was that kind of woman. She asked him one question, was he certain? He said he was. She asked if the certainty felt like peace or like compulsion. He thought about it for a long time. He said it felt like both, and that he believed that was what obedience was supposed to feel like. They did not marry before he left. Margaret said she would wait. She said it the way some people say things. Not as a promise under pressure, but as a simple statement of fact. The way you say it is raining because you can see the rain. Frederick Norwood sailed from Liverpool in the autumn of 1909. He was 26 years old. He had a steamer trunk, a medical bag with equipment that had taken him 4 months to assemble, a Bible his father had given him with a Hamilton postmark stamped on the flyleaf, and approximately 6 words of Punjabi. The hospital at Kangra was not what any optimistic reading of the mission report would have prepared him for. The building was a converted colonial rest house, high ceilings, crumbling plaster, window shutters that did not quite close. There were 20 beds. There were usually 40 patients. The water had to be boiled. The surgical instruments were sterilized in an open vessel on a wood stove. The nearest supply depot was 2 days' travel by cart on roads that became rivers of mud from October through April. The 2 nurses who had been running the hospital were named Sister Agnes Pringle, a Presbyterian missionary from Glasgow, and Preethi, a local convert woman in her 40s who knew more about tropical illness than anyone Frederick had met in 4 years of medical school. Frederick had the medical degree. Preethi had 15 years of direct field experience. He was wise enough to understand, within the first week, who was actually going to teach whom. He wrote to Margaret every 2 weeks. He described the work in careful detail because she had asked him to. He described the patients, the distances people walked, the cases he had never encountered in a Canadian hospital. He did not describe the nights, which were another matter entirely. The nights were when Frederick learned to pray in a way he had never prayed in Hamilton. He had been a praying man before India. He believed in prayer genuinely, but prayer in Hamilton had been conducted from a position of basic stability, food on the table, a warm study, a manageable uncertainty about the future. Prayer in Kangra was conducted from a position of frank inadequacy. He did not have enough medicine, he did not have enough equipment, he did not have enough training for everything he was being asked to treat, and people's lives depended on the gap between what he had and what was needed. So he prayed differently, not longer necessarily, but with a different quality of desperation, the kind of prayer that is not asking for comfort but for capacity. He would sit in the storage room behind the ward at midnight with his back against the supply shelves and simply hold before God the cases he did not know how to handle. There was a young woman with a complicated delivery he had never been trained for. There was a child with a wound infection he didn't have the antibiotics to treat. There was a man who had walked from a village 3 days away with his son, and Frederick did not know what was wrong with the boy. And he sat in that storage room at midnight and said, out loud, to no one and everyone, I do not know what I am doing. I need you to know what I am doing. And something would come, not always immediately, sometimes in the morning, sometimes inexplicably in the middle of a procedure, a clarity, a steadiness, a sense that he was not entirely alone in the room. He began to regard this not as mystical but as ordinary, as simply what prayer was for, when you had no other option. In 1912, after 2 years in Kangra, the Mission Society wrote to tell him they were transferring him to a larger hospital in the city of Ludhiana. Better equipment, more staff, more resources. Frederick wrote back and declined. He had come to understand something about Kangra that the mission administrators in London had not. The people in those mountain villages had nowhere else. Ludhiana had 3 other hospitals within travel distance. Frederick stayed. The Mission Society wrote again in 1914, more firmly. Frederick wrote back more firmly. He was not difficult. He was not a rebel. He was simply a man who had located the place where his presence mattered most and saw no compelling reason to leave it. He stayed at Kangra for 25 years. Margaret waited 6 years. In the 7th year, she wrote him a letter, careful and honest, the way she did everything, and told him that she had met a good man who wanted a life in Hamilton, and that she had to make a decision she could live with for the rest of her days. She said she would always hold Frederick in her prayers. She said she believed God was doing something through him that she had not been called to see up close. Frederick read that letter in the storage room at midnight. He sat with it for a long time. He wrote in his journal that night, one of the few entries in all those years that came close to sentiment. She was right to go. Some people are built for the going out, and some people are built for the staying beside, and it is not a lesser thing to be built for the staying beside. It is just a different thing. The Lord knows what He is asking of each of us. He did not write about his own grief. But there are 40 pages of his journal from November 1916 that contain nothing but scripture references and single-line prayers, and anyone who has ever been lonely knows what that kind of writing looks like. By the 1920s, the hospital at Kangra had expanded. Frederick had trained 2 local men as medical assistants. He had established a system of traveling clinics that reached 14 villages in the surrounding hills. a network of scheduled visits, so that people did not have to walk 3 days to Kangra, but could expect the doctor in their own village once a month. He had written a small handbook in Punjabi on basic hygiene and wound care that the Mission Society eventually printed and distributed across the Punjab. None of this was famous. None of it was reported in the mission newsletters except in passing references. Frederick had specifically declined to have his work featured. When asked why, he said, "Because the work is not about me, and any story that makes it about me is a story about the wrong thing." There was a period in 1921. He was 38 years old, when a cholera outbreak swept through 7 villages in the Kangra Valley in a matter of 3 weeks. The scale was beyond anything the hospital's infrastructure could absorb. Frederick worked without sleeping more than 4 hours a night for 5 weeks. He coordinated supply deliveries, trained village women in basic rehydration technique, made the rounds of 4 villages on horseback through October monsoon rains. 47 people died. He knew all of them by name. 212 survived who, by the statistical odds of that outbreak in that region, should not have. He wrote in his journal on the last day of the outbreak 3 words, "Thank you." Then a line, then, 47 is not nothing. Lord, receive them. Then another line, then, tomorrow, begin again. He never wrote a report about the cholera outbreak. The Mission Society's annual record for 1921 contains a 3-line notation. Outbreak of cholera in the Kangra district. Dr. Norwood coordinated relief efforts. Situation resolved by November. That is the entire historical record. 212 people lived who would otherwise have died. 3 lines in a report that no one reads. This is who Frederick Norwood was. In 1926, a young man from a village called Berwa arrived at the Kangra hospital. He was 19 years old. His name was Devraj. He had walked 2 days because he wanted to be a doctor, and he had heard that the Canadian doctor at Kangra would sometimes take on a student. Frederick looked at this young man, thin, serious-eyed, shoes held together with twine, and said yes. Devraj became one of the finest medical practitioners in the Kangra Valley. He later trained 3 more. Those 3 trained others. By 1960, there was a network of trained medical workers across the Kangra Hills that could trace a direct line of mentorship back to a Tuesday morning in Kangra, when a quiet Canadian doctor said yes to a boy with twine on his shoes. Frederick never knew about the 1960 network. He was gone by then. In 1930, Frederick contracted a severe respiratory infection that did not fully resolve. He recovered enough to continue working, but he was never quite the same physically afterward. He became thinner. He tired more easily. The Mission Society, this time, did not suggest transfer. They sent a second doctor, a young man from Nova Scotia named Callum, to work alongside him. Frederick trained Callum the same way Preethi had trained Frederick 20 years earlier, by being present, by explaining nothing that could be demonstrated. By the winter of 1933, it was clear that Frederick was ill in a way that was not going to resolve. The Mission Society arranged for him to be moved to a larger hospital with better facilities. This time, Frederick agreed, not because he had given up, but because he had learned. Slowly, over 2 decades, the difference between holding on out of strength and holding on out of pride. He died on a Thursday morning in February 1934. He was 51 years old. He died in the tuberculosis ward of a missionary hospital in the Northern Hills, with less fanfare than a man who had given 25 years of his life deserved. There was no large gathering. The Canadian papers ran no obituary. The Hamilton Spectator printed 6 lines in the deaths column. Dr. Frederick B. Norwood, formerly of Hamilton, medical missionary, Punjab, India, age 51. Survived by his parents, Harold and Edith Norwood, and his sister Constance, remembered for his service. That was all. But there were 14 villages in the Kangra Valley where, on the Sunday after Frederick died, the local pastors stood in their churches and asked the congregation to observe a moment of silence for the Canadian doctor. Not because the Mission Society asked them to, not because anyone organized it, because the people in those villages knew what they had. There was Devraj, who was 30 years old in 1934 and had been practicing medicine for 8 years, who sat outside the hospital the night Frederick died and did not come in until morning. No one knew what he did out there all night. He never spoke of it. There were 212 people, and their children, and their children's children, who were alive in the Kangra Valley in 1934 because of 5 weeks in October and November of 1921, when a Canadian man did not sleep more than 4 hours a night for 35 days. There was a woman in the village of Dharamsalian who had been delivered of twins in 1912, during a complicated birth that Frederick had never been trained to handle, in a room lit by 2 oil lamps. During a rainstorm, having prayed in the dark beforehand for 30 minutes with his back against the wall of the room, because he did not know how else to be ready. Both mother and children survived. The twins were 22 years old in 1934, grown, working, living. They did not know the name of the doctor who had brought them into the world. Frederick had not stayed to be thanked. He never stayed to be thanked. This is the thing that the short column in the Hamilton Spectator cannot tell you. Frederick Norwood was not a man who required recognition to continue. He was not sustained by visibility. He was sustained by something else. By that conversation in the storage room at midnight. By the accumulated weight of 25 years of being present to the need in front of him. By a practice of prayer that had started as desperation and become, over time, as natural to him as breathing. His father had said to him, on the morning Frederick left for Liverpool in 1909, "Son, the world is full of men who want to do good things with their lives as long as it doesn't cost them too much. Find out what it costs and pay it anyway." Frederick paid it. Every year, every sleepless night, every form letter he declined to answer, every speaking tour he refused, every moment when recognition was offered and he turned and walked back to the ward. His mother had kept every letter he wrote. 63 letters over 25 years. After his death, she arranged them in order and tied them with a blue ribbon and kept them in the drawer of her writing desk until she died. No one published them. No mission magazine featured them. They passed eventually to Constance, and then to Constance's daughter, and they may still exist somewhere in a house in Hamilton that doesn't know what it contains. What those letters would tell you, if you read them, is not a tale of a great man. Frederick never believed he was a great man. What they would tell you is the story of someone who decided, in a furnished room in Toronto in the spring of 1909, that the life he had been given was not meant to be spent on his own comfort, and then who went out and spent it. Completely. Without theater. Without applause. Without ever quite understanding, probably, how much it would demand. He asked for that. He prayed for it. He asked to be used and he was told the price and he said yes. And he said yes again in 1912 when the Mission Society wanted to move him. And again in 1916 when he was lonely in a way he could not fully write about. And again in 1921 when 47 people died and he could not save them. And again in 1930 when his body began failing him. Yes, yes. This is what it looks like to pay the price. Not in one dramatic moment of surrender, though it starts there, but in the 1,000 quiet renewals of a decision made in a furnished room in Toronto when no one was watching, renewed every subsequent morning in a storage room in Kangra when only God could hear. His gravestone, erected by the local congregation who pooled their money to provide it, reads in both English and Punjabi, Frederick Blythe Norwood. He came, he stayed, he prayed. 6 words, the whole life. If you are reading this from the comfortable remove of a century, the question Frederick's life asks you is not whether you would do what he did. Most of us are not called to Punjab. The question is simpler and harder than that. It is, what is the thing you already know you are supposed to do and have not done yet because the cost is higher than you had planned for? The storage room at midnight. The prayer that admits inadequacy. The letter that says yes when everything reasonable says wait. The decision to stay when leaving would be so much easier. Frederick Norwood did not change the world in ways the world could measure. He changed it in the only ways that actually last. One patient, one student, one village, one midnight prayer at a time. The Hamilton Spectator gave him 6 lines. Heaven we trust. Gave him rather more than that.